Baby's first end of the year book tag. I am so excited for today's video. I have never done this, obviously. Now, some of these questions I found from other YouTubers like Sarah Caroli and Destiny Sidwell, I believe, as well. And then some of them I also found just on TikTok. And then I was like, wait, do I have to follow these lists to the T? Because some of these I don't even have answers to, like my favorite quotes of the year, series that I read. Like, I haven't read that many series. And then I was like, wait a second. I have free will. I can just pick the questions that I want to answer. And here we are. So now I have like a smorgasbord of questions that I would love to share my answers to with y'all. So let's get started. Numero uno is the worst book I read this year, or the most disappointing book I've read this year. And that is easy without question. It is Haunting Adeline. I still cannot think about that book. But if I am forced to remember the traumatic experience I had with that book, then you're forced to listen again. That book just was horrible in so many ways. The writing was terrible. The plot didn't make sense. The plot development was subpar at best. Dang. I'm talking about American cafeteria food, okay? It was just not there. It was not good. And I really had high hopes because so many people talked about this book. So many people recommended it to me. And yet again, I was bamboozled by the booktok TikTok era thing. I sound like your grandma, but you know what I'm talking about. Speaking of being bamboozled or having the wool pulled over my eyes, the next question is, what was the most overhyped book I read this year? Without a doubt, I must not lie, it was Assistant to the Villain. I'm sorry. So many people, again, recommended this book. And by the way, I read the synopsis. I knew what it was about. It's like this fairy tale world. It really gave me Shrek vibes. This girl, she was going to be the assistant to the most known and notarized villain in the town or whatever. And they obviously had this grumpy sunshine mix going on, this work romance thing, and it was going to fall into love and become love. And that idea is so freaking good. I thought the synopsis was fire. I thought the idea was fire. But when I read it, I was like, is that it? I just couldn't believe it. It was so cliche, unbelievably cliche. I saw the plot a mile away. I saw the mystery a mile away. Like literally, if you've read any type of romance, at least 3 romance books, you would have known what was gonna happen. It felt so unbelievably formulaic that nothing surprised me, and it wasn't fun. It just felt like a compilation of a bunch of books that I've already read before, and that was just so disappointing because I really thought this was going to be one of my favorite romances of the year, and it just was not that. So yeah. Next question is, what book surprised you? Also, we're in jammies now because it's almost my bedtime, if you couldn't tell by the energy.
Jesus Christ.
A book that surprised me this year. Well, we read about 60 books now by the end of 2024, which is crazy because my goal is 52 books and we read 60. We're just an overachiever, I guess. Throughout those 60 books, I think the one book that genuinely surprised me was When in Rome by Sarah Adams. This is a small town romance about this guy named Noah and this girl named Amelia. Amelia is this pop star who's trying to just escape her life. So she goes to Rome, Kentucky, not Rome, Italy. Don't get confused. And she's stuck in Noah's house until her car starts working again. And she's there for like a few weeks. And obviously they fall in love. And it was just so genuinely cute. Now, this was my first Sarah Adams book. I didn't know what to expect. Honestly, truly, didn't know what to expect. Everyone did tell me it was good. I looked it up on Goodreads. It had good ratings and I liked the synopsis, but I was genuinely surprised by how much I love this book. This was a 5-star for me. There was absolutely no spice. The spice could not be found. There was like one scene where they kissed and they got a little bit hot and bothered, but that was literally it, which is very surprising. Sarah Adams did such a wonderful job with like building the suspense, building the sexual tension, the want for each other without any spice. And I was like, wow. That takes good writing. That's not something that's easy to do. I feel like a lot of the times authors nowadays, especially romance authors, they really rely heavily on like the explicit sex scenes, and the fact that she was able to give me the feels without showing me anything, I was like, wow. Wow, Sarah, you're about that life, and I appreciate that. And so with that, I had to read her second book, Practice Makes Perfect. Now, I thought I was gonna love this book just because the main character seemed more like me. She felt super awkward around men. She didn't really have much practice with dating and things like that. And she just felt like she was never enough. And so I thought like, oh my God, like we are very similar. Let's try to read this. But I'm not gonna lie, I felt like the first book, When in Rome, was far better than Practice Makes Perfect, which really disappointed me because the guy in the second book sounded like the type of guy that I would like. like he was a bodyguard, tattoos, everything, scumdiddlyumptious, right? And the fact that she was so much like me, but it just didn't give the same energy. It didn't make me kick, scream, and giggle the way I wanted to. And that was a little disappointing. That was a tangent, but I just had to give you a little bit more context for why I love that book. Question number 4 is what was my favorite book couple of the year? And that is so easy to answer, so easy, by far, hands down. Funny story, it has to be Daphne and Miles. Miles has my heart the way Elliot Petropoulos has my heart from Love and Other Words. He is so perfect, like literally perfect in the most imperfect sense. Like he is just so human. He's empathetic, he's kind, he's funny. Oh my gosh, he was so funny. I literally have never laughed so much in a romance book. And y'all know, I've said it so many times this year, I was not an Emily Henry fan. I'll be the first to admit it. I was not a fan. I did not like her books. I read Book Lovers. What else did I read? I read something else and I didn't like it. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna give her a chance because everyone keeps telling me this is one of her best books. And you know, I have the 3-strike rule with authors. So I'm like, you know what? Let me just try this out. And I was floored. The audiobook, incredible. If you're gonna read this book and this is your first like Emily Henry book where you're trying to see if you like her, I am telling you, listen to the audiobook. I will be absolutely floored if you do not like this book. I will literally give you back your money. Not really, but I would literally give you not really your money back if you don't like the audiobook, because the audiobook was so fantastic. So much so that it made me want to reread the book all over again. I bought it on my Kindle, I bought the physical book, and I'm like, I need to reread this book. That's how good it is. Like immediately up there with Love and Other Words, and that never ever ever happens. Highly recommend, by the way. I love that couple. They were so human, so just realistic and funny, and I just related to them so much. I loved them. I loved them together. I loved their dynamic. I loved their banter. She made them like larger than the words on the page. She made them real for me. She made them human. And that is just so hard to find, especially in a romance book. I feel like usually with romance, these characters always seem like perfectly imperfect, like to the point where it's like, they have this hard life, blah, blah. It's very formulaic, right? But these people felt so human. They made simple mistakes. They had embarrassing moments in the story. And I feel like that's something that really made them real for me. The embarrassing moment. Like there was an instance in the book, I mentioned it before, where they first tried to kiss and it was very awkward. And things like that just really humanized them for me. And it just made me love their dynamic more, because even when they were embarrassed and they didn't really see eye to eye, they always tried to understand the other person and just be super honest about where they were in their life. And I don't know. I loved that whole situation. That book was literally perfect for me. And I'm honestly still surprised by the fact that I loved it so much. Question number 5 is what was my favorite main characters of the year? And I have 3. They're all very different from each other, but they all have a special place in my heart. Number 1, Bree from Legendborn. I love that girl. I feel like I am that girl. I feel like I am Bree. I go to South Carolina University. I believe that's the school that she went to. And I feel like I have magical powers and everybody's obsessed with me. I'm just kidding. But no, she was so cool. She was very headstrong, very stubborn, but in the best way. Like she really fought for what she believed in. She wasn't a pushover. She didn't let people push her over. And I just loved how strong she was. She was like everything I want to be. You know what I mean? She was just perfect. Then the other person is Inej from 6 of Crows. As y'all know, I was completely flabbergasted by how much I loved that book. The writing was absolutely insane. So good. The wit, the cleverness it took to create that story. And not only that, but the different characters that were in the story and the character development of those characters. She left nothing on the table. She gave us her all, and it truly showed in the story. Inej was just that girl for me. I just loved how she wasn't very sure of herself, and she just slowly broke down her own walls, saw that she was stronger than she actually gave herself credit for. She was the backbone of this group, and she began to learn to put herself first, and that was what was really beautiful. The thing that I really admire about Inej is the fact that she's a silent killer. Like she, not only in the literal sense, but also in the what's the opposite of literal? Abstract sense. Also in that way too, because she was carrying the group in my opinion, but she didn't do it by being boastful and saying like, oh, I'm taking care of everybody, or like made it known that she was taking care of everyone. She would just do these silent acts of kindness and acts of love for the people that were in her group. And I just loved that so much. I loved everything about her. I loved her story. I loved how she fought and decided to move past it and to try to be the best version of herself. I just loved her so much. And I loved her dynamic with the other characters. characters. I don't want to say too much, but I loved it so much. I could not believe how much I loved her as a character. And last but not least, the person who has my heart, who had my heart first this year, is Ron Weasley from Harry Potter. I honestly thought it was going to be Hermione just because she's the only girl in the group, and I always like connect more with the women in stories and stuff like that. But Ron was very surprising. I loved his humor. I love that he was willing to die for his friends. He was always like there for Harry. He was always there for Hermione, even though he didn't know how to show his own emotions and things. And I feel like in the movies, he doesn't get as much credit as he deserves, especially within the books. He was so ready to go for Harry. He was not playing around. He's like, who wants to fight me? This is my best friend. He's like a brother to me. Who wants to fight? And even when they had their ups and downs and they had their quarrels, he still tried his best to be there for Harry and put his own like issues aside. And he grew throughout the story, and it was just really beautiful to see their dynamic as a trio, but also as the duo of Harry and Ron, because Harry never had true family, and Ron's family took him in as his own. And I thought that was really beautiful, and that was something that Harry definitely needed for his development. And I love that kid so much. I love Ron Weasley. He made me laugh so much throughout that entire series. Even when things got hard and I was crying and sobbing and blubbering, he really held it together for me, and I couldn't ask for more from a character than that. Question number 6 is new favorite author you discovered this year. Okay, I have two. T. Kingfisher, who wrote What Moves the Dead. I loved that book so much. That immediately told me that she could write, and I want to read everything else that she has written. So I bought a few more books from her, and I can't wait to read them. And secondly, V.E. Schwab, and they wrote The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And that was a book we read in my book club last month in November. And oh my goodness, that book was a work of art. It was so lyrical. There were so many quotable verses, and the plot was really, really well done. I had such a fun time reading that. It was a hard book at some points, but it was really beautiful. I think that's the only word that can genuinely describe it. It's just beautiful, and that made me want to read more books by that author. Questions 7 and 8 go kind of hand in hand. So 7 is, what is the longest book I read this year? And I think it's between two. It's Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix, which was like 820 pages or something like that. And then Devious Lies. That was like 850 pages, and I just refused to let that be my answer because that book was garbo. It was so bad. I only read it because it was a Kindle Unlimited free book, and I'm cheap. Okay, that's the only reason why. But Harry Potter was obviously wonderful. So Harry Potter was a 6-star. Devious Lies was less than 1 star. And there you go. Then question number 8 is, what is the shortest book I read? Which was obviously The Yellow Wallpaper. That book was so good. I really enjoyed that. I definitely want to read that again. But it was only like 20 or 30 pages, I believe. So let's call it a novella. Question number 9 is book or series you wish you got to by the end of the year. Now, this is one I want to hear from y'all. So first of all, if you made it to this point in the video, leave a book emoji down below just so I know that you're a real one. And also like and subscribe while you're down there. But tell me, what are some books that you wish you got to this year, and what are some series you wish you got to this year, because I want to add them to my next year reading goals. So for me personally, I genuinely wish I read Dark Matter. We started it and it was so incredible. Immediately I knew this was going to be a book that would change my life the same way that Hail Mary did, but I just didn't have the time for it, and I had to immediately pick up my next book club book. Then I had to finish our November TBR, and it just got lost in the weeds, and I'm just so disappointed that I didn't get to finish reading it. I'm honestly still trying to finish it this year. If I can get to it, I will. If not, that's definitely something I have to read in January. And then with regards to series, I do wish that I read ACOTAR. I just wanted to read it this year because I've been trying to read this series for like 3 years. It's so terrible. I've been trying to read it for so long. Again, I keep saying I read the first book like 2 years ago at this point, and I just never continued the series because I felt like the first book was kind of slow, and I have all the books now. I just need to read it. I genuinely just need to read it just to say that I've read it, and I'm hoping it's a good time. I don't know what to expect. The first book wasn't bad. It was just a little boring to me. So I do wish I read that. And another book I really wanted to read this year was Magnolia Parks. I owe Shaughnessy. I told her I was going to read this book, especially this year, and I just have not gotten the time for it. She loves this series. It is her holy grail series, and it is just my duty as a friend to read it and let her know if I like it or not, and I just haven't gotten the chance to. It makes me so upset. I really thought I was gonna get to it this year. I think that's a book I also need to add to my January TBR. Like, I just need to get it done at the top of the year just so that I can say I checked these books off my list and I can continue moving forward and pick new books that I want to read throughout 2025. Question number 10 is my favorite book club book, and that is hard because we read some really, really good ones. But if I have to think about it, I would have to say it was probably Legendborn. Legendborn was so good, and we had so many fun interactive discussions with that, and I honestly had such a wonderful time doing the lives with that video, making videos for them and stuff like that with that book. It was really good. There were so many ups and downs and stuff like that. It was an easy 5-star for me. Easy 5-star. That's where Brie came from, Legendborn. And I also want to read the second book. I have the second book actually, and a few of the book club girls were saying that they want to read it at the beginning of next year as well, so we were going to read it together outside of book club. So I think we're still going to do that, so I'm very happy about that. Also, if you want to join my book club, I have a Patreon book club. The link is down below. It is such a fun time. We meet multiple times throughout the week and we read a new book every single month. It is literally my favorite thing outside of YouTube, and I highly recommend if you want to read with me. Question number 11 is a book that I haven't been able to stop thinking about, and that is hard because I have a few books that I haven't been able to think about, so we're just going to do it rapid fire. Number 1, The Joy Luck Club. It was a book I read in February, I believe, and I literally think about it every week. So freaking good. An easy 6-star read. My first 6-star read of the year. Funny story, obviously, I'm in love with them. I will never stop talking about them as much as I talk about Love in Other Words. Also, Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. That book changed my life. It was so good. I definitely have to read it again next year. I love that girl. And last but not least, Harry Potter, the entire Harry Potter series. I'm just gonna make that one whole book. That was so fun. I genuinely have not felt that type of joy with reading a series. Those 2.5 months I read that series was like the best 2.5 months of the year. I was just so engulfed in the story. I felt like a kid again. I felt like how I used to feel when I used to stay up reading books, even though I was told to go to bed, when I would eat dinner at the dinner table and I would get in trouble for bringing my book to the dinner table because I couldn't put it down. That's the energy it gave me, and I just had such a wonderful time. I think about those books all the time. I would 1000% reread them, but now I'm kind of happy that I won't do that just because the books are so long and they're very traumatizing. They were so traumatizing. No, I was actually sobbing multiple times throughout the week reading those books, and I just can't do it anymore. I don't have the emotional capacity anymore to be sobbing over fictional characters. I cannot do it. I am sorry, Harry. Figure it out yourself. Question number 12 is some of my favorite book quotes of the year. Now, this isn't all of them just because there's no way to go back and check all 60 books, but this is just a few that I want to talk about. Now, this first one is from Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. Now, these quotes do not convince you to read this gosh darn mother freaking book. You are a lost cause. There's no way this wouldn't hook me immediately. Okay, number 1. Now, this is when she was talking about her chaotic love life, and at this section, she was just talking about a love that just wasn't meant for her. I would have done anything to keep this man in my life. The love I felt was aggressive and fraught. I loved him with panic and passion. I didn't fall in love. Love fell on me like a ton of bricks from a great height. I didn't have a choice but to let go of an obsession that was on its way to destroying everything. Wow. One more from that book. Here she's talking about going through something in your life and telling the story about it. She says, when you're in the middle of a story, it isn't a story at all, but only a confusion, a dark roaring, a blindness, a wreckage of shattered glass and splintered wood, like a house in a whirlwind, or else a boat crushed by the icebergs or swept over by the rapids, and all aboard, powerless to stop it. It's only afterwards that it becomes anything like a story at all, when you are telling it to yourself or to someone else. I just love how she writes. Like, sometimes she can be really funny and sometimes she's about that business. You know what I'm saying? Now, these quotes are from The Six of Crows. One of them, I just loved how clever this was written. It says, a secret's not like coin. It doesn't keep its value in the spending. I just loved that. I just loved how it was said. It was very clever. Then another section said, she wouldn't wish love on anyone. It was the guest you welcomed and then couldn't get rid of. Ugh, I can relate. Not really. And the last book I want to get a quote from is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is what I'm talking about saying it's just so quotable. It's just so beautiful. So at this section, she's just talking about her curse. So she's cursed to where no one can remember her after about 30 seconds, or if they walk out of a room, they no longer remember her or anything about her. And so she says, being forgotten, she thinks, is a bit like going mad. You begin to wonder what is real if you are real. After all, how can a thing be real if it cannot be remembered? It's like the Zen koan, the one about the falling tree in the woods. If no one heard it, did it happen? If a person cannot leave a mark, do they exist? And stuff like that really made me like think about my own life. And the last one I want to talk about is from the same book, and it says, small places make for small lives. And some people are fine with that. They like knowing where to put their feet. But if you only walk in other people's steps, you cannot make your own way. You cannot leave a mark. Ugh, I love that book. So good. Also, let me know some good quotes that stuck out to you this year. I know it's really hard to go back and check those things, but I love a good quotable sentence. So if you've got something for me, leave it down below. Question number 13 is a book that had the most unique concept that I read this year. I would have to say there's two books in mind. The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, as well as Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. Both those books were nuts, honestly. I've never read any books like them. Earthlings, I honestly genuinely don't know what to tell you with regards to a synopsis for that book. I would just say check the synopsis, check the trigger warnings. I can't even say I would recommend it. There were some sections of the book where I thought it was really good and it was a beautiful way to explain certain situations. But the ending for me just was like, what the hell is happening? I couldn't understand it. I don't know what I read. It was so bizarre, so insane. It kind of has to do with aliens and not feeling like you're meant for societal norms and things like that. That's like the basis. That's the very basic information I can give you for this story without giving you too much information. And honestly, I just genuinely don't know how to explain that book. And then The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This book was like his other books like Coraline and stuff like that. It tried to placate the imagination of children, but also by giving us a very scary, very creepy story. And it follows this guy. He comes back to his childhood home and his hometown after someone passes away, and he goes to meet his neighbor again, and he sees like that they're these magical beings. They're not necessarily made of this world. You don't really know who they are or what they are, and you follow the story of how they met when he was younger and the things that happened when he was a child. And it's very fantastical. It's very out of this world, but it's done in such a way that I've never seen it before. It's not like a regular fantasy book. It was very like extra worldly and very cool, very much like Coraline, I feel like, just a different perspective, I guess, just from a different kid's perspective in a different situation. Now, question number 14 says, Goodreads goal reflection and 2025 reading goals. Ooh, that's a good question. I would say I'm very proud of myself this year. I read 60 books again, and my goal was 52 books. And honestly, I still can't believe I've read that much. I've read so much as a kid, and it was different when you're a child because there's no goals, there's no competition, there's no job. Like, this is my job now. So even though reading is my passion and I love reading so much, it's also intertwined with my income now. It is my job now. So now I have to read. It's not just I want to read, it's I have to read. So at some points I felt like I was reading just to read, even though I didn't have the joy in it. But I will say, overall, reflecting from this year, I had a great time. I found so many good books, and I love that part of reading. I love, like, you don't know what kind of books you're going to read this year. You don't know how books are going to affect you. You're a different person as you grow. Every year, you're a different person. So maybe a book that you wouldn't have liked a year ago is now your favorite 6-star read this year. And I just love the mystery of that. I love discovering it. And I love looking back and seeing like, oh my gosh, like me last year had no idea this book was going to affect me this way. And I think that that's what's really cool. So I think overall this year, I had a really strong reading year. Harry Potter, honestly, carried it for me. But it's not just Harry Potter. Like, it's not just those 8 books that I read. I found so many good romances. I found so many good fantasy books. Like, I really got into fantasy this year. So much so that I kind of wanted to like take a step back from romance in 2025 and really discover like what kind of fantasy books I like, what kind of sci-fi books I like. I feel like I am just tipping the iceberg with like my sci sci-fi era. I feel like I could go into a huge rabbit hole with sci-fi, and I'm really excited for that. Like, as you guys know, like I got a bachelor's degree in biology. I love science, genuinely. So to mix like science and thrillers or fantasy and romance and stuff like that, mixing all of my favorite things in a book, I feel like I could just have such a wonderful time. So I think that that's definitely one of my goals for 2025. But also another thing I really want to mention for 2025 is I want to read more series, but specific series. There are some series where I'm like, I'm never going to touch this because I know it's not something I'm going to like, but there are a few series where I'm like, I need to read them. Some of them I've already read, like the Hunger Games and Percy Jackson series. Those are two series that I read when I was a child, I believe. Yeah, in middle school or high school, and I absolutely loved them, but I do want to reread them. I do want to revisit them just because I know how incredible those worlds are. But I also want to read some new ones. I want to read ACOTAR. I definitely want to read a few more of the Legendborn books and see if there's any new fantasy coming out next year that will really pique my interest. So I'm just really excited for my goals for next year, and I'm thinking I just like the simplicity of making my goal 52 books a year. So I think my goal for next year, my Goodreads goal for next year will also be 52 books. But I think realistically, outside of just putting this down for Goodreads, I think it would be really cool if I can get to 65 books next year. And then hopefully the year after, I'll get to 75 books. I think my cap, once I finally get there, will be 100 books a year, which is so cool. That would be really cool if I could do that. But I don't think I ever want to go past 100 because it's like, at that point, am I just reading to get through books and to tick it off a list, or am I reading to enjoy it? And I never want to lose the joy in reading. So I think I'll never go past 100 books, but I do hope I get to that goal one day. One day. I don't think it's next year, and I don't think it's the year after that, but definitely one day. It would be so cool to say I read 100 books in a year. Now that is all for me, my end of the year book tag. This was so much fun, honestly. It's really cool to look back at all the books that you've read and just to see where you were in those times. And I don't know, it just makes me really happy. So I can't wait to do this again next year. Let me know in the comments below what books that really stood out for you this year, what books you want to read next year, and please continue to like and subscribe. I love y'all so much. I literally could not do this without you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being my favorite reading buddy throughout the entire year, and I cannot wait to read with you again next year. All right, I love you. Bye. Mwah.